future can't wait.
All right, welcome in everyone to another deep dive. Today we are taking a closer look at Firefly Neuroscience, Inc., ticker symbol AIFF.
Yeah.
So this is a company that's working in a very interesting area, right at the intersection of artificial intelligence and brainwave activity.
Exactly.
You want to give us kind of the quick overview of what they do and how they do it?
Sure. So at the heart of everything they do is their FDA-cleared brain network analytics BNA platform.
Okay.
So think of it as this tool that analyzes the electrical activity in the brain captured by an EEG
Okay.
to really improve the diagnosis and treatment of a bunch of neurological and mental health conditions.
Okay, so EEG, everybody kind of knows that's the brainwave, like the squiggly lines and stuff like that.
Right.
Is that what we're talking about, or is it something more than that?
It is that, but it's going like deeper than just looking at the individual brain waves.
Okay.
So they're using AI actually to map the connections and networks of activity across different brain regions.
Oh, wow.
So it's really a network level analysis, revealing these subtle patterns that you might miss with just traditional EEG.
So this would be like analogous to if you were just looking at a city from above and you're just seeing like, okay, there's some lights, there's some cars, and there's some buildings.
Right.
But if you could actually look at like where all the power lines and the sewer lines and all the connections are, then you can really see
Exactly.
how the city functions.
Exactly. And it's looking at the flow of information, the traffic patterns in the brain, so to speak.
Okay, so that's what they do. That's how they do it. For this this deep dive, what sources have we got to look at?
So we've got a range of information for you, starting with their most recent earnings report.
Okay.
This covered both the fourth quarter and the full year 2024.
Okay.
Released very recently, March 19th of this year.
Yeah.
And, of course, we've also been keeping a close eye on their stock performance, particularly since around March 11th, when they had some pretty big news, which we'll talk about.
Okay.
And we've also got kind of other key developments and news that we'll be covering.
Okay, so we've got the earnings report, we've got stock performance. What else we got?
You know, just any news articles, press releases,
Okay.
analyst reports.
All right. So our mission today, we're going to look at all this stuff. We're going to try and answer, I guess, 3 big questions. 1, financial health.
Yeah.
How are they doing? How's the money?
Exactly.
2, partnerships. Any big ones? Any important ones?
Absolutely. We got to talk NVIDIA.
Okay.
That's the big one.
All right. So we'll get to that. And then 3, overall outlook.
Yeah.
Where are they headed?
What's the potential trajectory of the company, both in terms of their technology and their stock?
Exactly. All right. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about the financials first. So from what we could find, we don't have a ton of like super specific revenue numbers for the fourth quarter.
Yeah, it's a little sparse on the details for Q4.
Right. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because they're like still in that early stage.
Yeah.
They're still like doing R&D. They're not like selling 1 million widgets a day or anything like that.
Exactly. They're very much still in that research and development and commercialization phase.
Right.
You know, laying the groundwork for hopefully future sales.
Yeah.
Broader adoption of the technology.
So very early revenue, maybe even pre-revenue is what we're thinking here.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure with the limited info, but that seems to be the picture.
Right.
You know, it's pretty typical for companies in this, cutting edge space.
Yeah.
They're making these big investments right now in the technology and getting it all set up for the future.
Okay. But we do have some numbers from a little earlier in the year.
Right.
So what was their loss in Q3 of 2024?
So they reported a loss of around $4.29 million for Q3 2024.
Okay.
And that's kind of a key figure to keep in mind as we look at the bigger picture.
Okay. And then so looking at like the entire year, the full 2024.
Right.
It seems like it's probably a lot more than what they reported in 2023.
Yeah, that's a safe bet.
Their quarterly loss back in 2023 was something like $650,000.
Right.
So I imagine, just looking at that Q3 number, I imagine the total for 2024 has got to be way higher than that, right?
Yeah, I think most people are anticipating a significant jump in their overall loss for 2024.
Okay.
Could easily be more than 10 million even.
Okay. And that makes sense though, right? They're doing a lot of stuff like, they had the merger and
right.
then
So they're doing a lot of R&D.
the ongoing R&D, operational costs. Yeah.
Yeah. So, not super surprising to see those numbers, but,
Yeah.
it is something to keep in mind.
Of course, investors will be keeping a close eye on how those losses are managed.
Right. And then the big question, of course, is how long can they keep this up, right?
Exactly.
How long can they keep spending money before they need to go get more money? Right. The cash runway question, that's always key for companies in this stage.
Exactly. But there is some good news on that front, right?
There is.
What happened in February?
Right. So back in February of 2025, Firefly managed to raise a pretty hefty sum, $8.8 million,
Oh, wow.
through something called warrant exercises.
Okay, and for those of us who aren't, high finance people, what's a warrant exercise?
So think of a warrant as kind of an option, right?
Okay.
It gives somebody the right to buy shares at a certain price in the future.
Okay.
And when those warrants are exercised, that means those options are being used, and the company gets a nice chunk of cash.
Okay.
In this case, they had 823,530 shares exercised at $6.83 each, and another 800,000 shares at $4.
Okay.
So that's a big boost to their available funds.
So that's a good sign.
Absolutely.
I mean, that means they can keep the lights on and keep doing their research
Exactly.
for a little while longer.
Yeah. It buys them time, gives them more runway to really focus on, getting that technology ready for market.
And how long does that extend their runway?
According to their statements, this should take them into mid-2026.
Oh, wow. So they're good for over a year.
Yeah, at least based on their projections.
Okay, that's good. That's good. That gives them some breathing room.
It does, and that kind of financial stability is really, really important for a company in this phase.
Okay.
It lets them focus on the long game, on developing that technology.
Yeah, without having to constantly worry about where the next dollar is coming from.
Exactly, and that can be crucial for innovation.
Okay, so we talked about the financials, we talked about the funding. Let's move on to those strategic advancements and partnerships.
Oh.
And the big one, the one everyone's talking about, is NVIDIA.
Yes, definitely a headline grabber.
So they officially joined the NVIDIA Connect program back on March 11th.
Right, and they highlighted this again in their recent earnings report.
Yeah, and they seem pretty excited about it, right?
They do, and for good reason.
Yeah. So what's the big deal here?
It's not just that they're working with NVIDIA, which is, a giant in the tech world.
Right.
But it's what they're aiming to do together.
Okay.
The goal is to build a proprietary foundation model of the human brain.
Okay, so what does that even mean?
So these foundation models, they're like these massive AI systems.
Okay.
They're trained on huge amounts of data.
Okay.
And then you can use them for a whole bunch of different tasks.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, they want to use all the data from Firefly's BNA platform to create this super detailed AI that can understand and maybe even predict different brain states.
Wow, that's ambitious.
It is.
So we're not just talking about diagnosing a specific condition. We're talking about really understanding how the brain works.
Yeah, it's about building this fundamental model of brain activity that could then be applied to so many different things.
And that's where NVIDIA comes in, right?
Exactly. They provide the computing power, the expertise in AI
right.
to make this huge project possible.
Okay, so I mean, if they can pull this off, it's kind of a game changer, right?
It could be. It could really position them as a leader in brain health.
Yeah, right.
Going way beyond just their current FDA-cleared platform.
Okay, so a lot riding on this partnership.
Yeah, high stakes, high potential rewards.
Okay, and then beyond NVIDIA, they've also mentioned, again, their partnerships with Zito Inc. and Amostomix.
Right. Those are ongoing collaborations.
Yeah, so what's the deal with those?
So Zito, they focus on developing rapid EEG devices.
Okay.
So you can see how that fits in.
Yeah.
Quicker, easier data collection.
Right.
Which could lead to faster diagnoses.
Yeah.
Potentially for patients.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty natural synergy there.
Okay, and then what about Hemostomix?
Hemostomix is in the cell therapy space.
Yeah. Okay.
So they haven't given a ton of details yet on how that partnership is playing out.
Okay.
But you can imagine, using Firefly's brain network analysis to better understand neurological conditions and how they might respond to these therapies.
Okay, so that's a lot more, I guess, speculative at this point.
Yeah, we need more information to really assess that one fully.
Okay, but the fact that they keep mentioning these partnerships suggests that they're still key to their strategy.
Absolutely. It signals their importance to Firefly's overall plans.
Okay, and then, the big question for a lot of people is like, okay, all this stuff sounds great, but when are they actually going to, make some money?
Right, the million-dollar question.
Exactly. And from what we've seen, Firefly's management, they're pretty optimistic.
They are. They've expressed optimism
Yeah.
about seeing more people using the BNA technology
Okay.
and the potential for revenue, throughout 2025.
Okay, so they're saying good things are coming. But I guess the one caveat is that we haven't seen any specific revenue projections.
Right, that's the key thing to note.
Yeah.
They haven't released, specific guidance on what they expect to make.
Right. So it's kind of like, they're saying they're going to be rich, but they're not saying how rich or when.
Exactly. So, investors are kind of left to speculate a bit.
Yeah. And that makes it tough because how do you evaluate the company if you don't know how much money they're going to make?
Right. It has a layer of uncertainty.
Yeah.
It's encouraging to hear that management's positive, but concrete numbers would give a much clearer picture.
Yeah. So until then, we're just kind of waiting and seeing.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk about the stock now. This thing has been all over the place.
It's been a wild ride.
Yeah, so back on March 11th, right around the time of the NVIDIA announcement, the stock price jumped up, potentially hit a high of 9.01.
Right, a big spike.
But today, March 28th, it's down to 4.11.
Yeah, that's a pretty steep drop.
Yeah, over 50%, right?
Yeah, roughly a 54% decline.
Wow, so that's a big swing.
It is, and if you look back even further, the volatility is even more dramatic.
Yeah, back in February, there was this crazy 240% gain.
Yeah, it went from 1.86 to over $15 at one point.
Wow, so this is not a stock for the faint of heart.
No, it's definitely been a roller coaster.
Yeah, and even now, the volatility is still pretty high, right?
Yeah, it's still considered a highly volatile stock.
So what's the 20-day volatility right now?
According to TradingView, it's around 15.23%.
Okay, so that's lower than it was at some points, but still pretty high.
Yeah, that means the price can swing up or down pretty significantly, even in a short time frame.
Right. So lots of speculation going on, lots of people trying to time the market.
It definitely seems that way.
Yeah, and we saw that reflected in the trading volume too, right?
Absolutely.
After the earnings report came out, there was a huge spike in volume.
Yeah, on February 27th, almost 1 million shares were traded.
Wow, so that tells you people are paying attention.
It does, and I'm sure there was another jump in volume around the time of the full earnings release on March 19th.
Yeah, so much interest in this stock.
It's definitely capturing people's attention.
Now, speaking of predictions, stockinvest.us. Back in February, they put out a forecast. They said they expected the stock to go up by 46% in 3 months.
Yeah, that was a pretty bullish prediction.
Yeah, and they had a price target range of, was 6.08 to 23.82.
Yeah, a pretty wide range.
Yeah, but obviously, it's March 28th now, and the stock is at 4.11. So that prediction hasn't exactly panned out yet.
No, not yet, but 3 months isn't over.
Yeah, there's still time. But it is interesting, that price right now, it's pretty close to where the stock found support before.
Right, around that 4.15 level.
Yeah.
So that could be a key indicator.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, it could mean that the stock is trying to establish a new base.
Okay.
Consolidate around that 4.15 level. But if it drops below that, it could signal further decline.
Okay, so 4.15, that's kind of like the line in the sand. If it stays above it, good.
Potentially.
If it falls below it, not so good.
It could mean more downward pressure.
Okay, all right, so one other thing we should mention. Back on February 14th, there was a special meeting.
Right, a shareholder meeting.
Yeah, and they approved some pretty big stock issuances.
They did, and that's something that investors always need to be aware of.
Yeah, so what does that mean for, the average person who owns some shares?
Well, when a company issues more stock,
Mm-hmm.
it can lead to something called dilution.
Okay.
Basically, your existing shares represent a smaller percentage of the total company. And that can sometimes put downward pressure on the stock price.
Okay, so it's kind of a trade-off, right? The company gets more money, but potentially the existing shares become worth a little bit less.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. They need the capital to grow.
Yeah.
But they have to be mindful of how it affects their shareholders.
Okay, all right. So we talked about the financials, we talked about the partnerships, we talked about the stock. What's the overall sentiment out there? Like, what are people saying about Firefly?
So it seems like there's still a lot of interest from retail investors.
Okay.
Like Insider Monkey just recently listed AIFF as one of the 10 most popular AI penny stocks under $5.
So people are still, like, excited about the potential.
Yeah, there's definitely buzz around the company,
Yeah.
especially with that connection to AI.
Right, right. And then, of course, you go on Twitter or I guess X now,
Right, X.
and you see like all kinds of opinions.
There's definitely a mix of viewpoints out there.
Yeah, so like what are some of the things you've seen?
Well, back on March 15th, one user at Flash Trading, he was saying the dip around $4 could be a buying opportunity.
Okay, so bargain hunters.
Yeah.
Coming in.
Yeah, looking for a potential rebound.
Oh.
But then you have someone like at Stock Authority a few days later on March 20th, highlighting the NVIDIA partnership, but also warning about the volatility.
Right, so kind of a cautious optimism maybe.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are excited about the potential,
Yeah.
but also aware of the risks.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes sense, especially given what's been happening in the market lately.
Right, we can't ignore the broader context.
Yeah, there was a pretty big sell-off in tech stocks just a few days ago.
Yeah, March 25th and 26th.
Yeah.
The NASDAQ dropped quite a bit.
Yeah, and even big companies like NVIDIA, they weren't immune. Their stock price went down too.
Right, even the giants felt the pressure.
So, when the whole market is kind of shaky, it's not surprising to see a stock like Firefly take a hit.
Yeah, those smaller, more speculative stocks tend to be more vulnerable.
Yeah. So that probably explains at least part of that drop from, 9.01 down to 4.11. Okay, so we've got a mix of opinions. We've got some good news, some bad news. What are the analysts saying?
Well, it's been a bit quiet on the analyst front.
Okay.
Not many formal updates since around March 11th. And coverage of Firefly is still pretty limited overall.
Okay, so it's hard to get like a really good read on what the professionals are thinking.
Yeah, it does make it more challenging to gauge the overall sentiment.
Yeah, but we do have that sell downgrade from stockinvest.us.
Right, back on February 27th.
Yeah, but that was before the earnings report, right?
It was, and, things have changed since then.
Yeah, so that might not be like super relevant anymore.
It's probably worth taking with a grain of salt, considering everything that's happened since.
Okay, and then the only other like real price target we have is still from that same stockinvest.us report.
Right, that 6.08 to 23.82 range.
Yeah, so I mean, even the low end of that range,
Mm-hmm.
it's still higher than where the stock is trading now.
It is. So, some might argue that the stock is undervalued.
But again, it's just one prediction. And this stock has been so volatile, it's hard to like put too much weight on any single forecast.
Right. Exactly. It's just one data point among many.
Okay, so let's try to like bring all this together. The big question that I'm sure a lot of people have is Firefly a buy right now?
Yeah, the buy or sell decision, that's what everyone wants to know.
Exactly. And of course, we're not giving financial advice, but we can at least lay out the arguments on both sides.
Absolutely. Let's explore the bull and bear cases.
Okay, so starting with the bullish side, what are some of the reasons to be optimistic about Firefly?
So from a bullish perspective, that $8.8 million cash infusion,
Right.
that's a big plus. It gives them that runway, into mid-2026.
Right.
So they're not like immediately scrambling for more funding. They can focus on the technology.
Yeah.
And then you have the long-term potential of the BNA platform itself, especially with that NVIDIA partnership. That Brain Foundation model, that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, if that works out, that could be huge. And then the current stock price, it's below that low end of the price target range.
Right, so there's room for growth there.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of interest from retail investors.
Yeah, that buzz hasn't gone away.
So, there could be some upward momentum there. Okay, so that's the bull case. What about the bear case?
What are the reasons to be cautious?
Yeah.
Well, that big drop after the earnings report,
Okay.
that's hard to ignore. It could mean the market was expecting more, or that there are concerns about the company's ability to generate revenue.
Yeah, and they are still losing money, quite a bit of money.
Right, and they're not bringing in much revenue yet.
Yeah.
So that's a risk. And then you have the potential for dilution from those stock issuances.
Right, so even if the company does well, your individual shares might not go up as much as you'd hope.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's just the overall market volatility, especially in the tech sector.
That's always a factor, especially for a company like this.
Yeah, so a lot to consider. It's definitely a risky investment.
Absolutely.
So for someone who's like thinking about buying Firefly at 4.5, what would you tell them?
I'd say at this price, it's really for those who are comfortable with risk,
Okay.
who are drawn to
Yeah.
the potential of AI in brain health. The NVIDIA collaboration, that's a big draw.
Yeah.
That cash boost they got, and that support level around $4, those offer some reassurance.
Okay.
But the price drop, the lack of clear revenue, those are definitely things to weigh carefully.
Yeah.
For more cautious investors, it might be best to wait, see how things develop,
Yeah.
maybe wait for more signs of profitability. And that 4.15 support level, that's key.
Okay.
If it holds above that, could be a good sign. But if it breaks below, could see further decline.
Okay. So that's kind of the key number to watch.
Yeah, keep an eye on that.
Okay. And then what else should people be looking for?
Well, the next big thing is probably the Q1 2025 earnings report.
Okay.
That'll give us more insight into their financial performance. And any updates on the NVIDIA partnership?
Okay.
Any progress on that Brain Foundation model? That'll be big news.
All right, so just to recap for everyone, Firefly Neuroscience, they've got some interesting technology. They've got a big partnership with NVIDIA, but the stock has been all over the place.
It's a volatile one.
Yeah.
And they're still losing money. So it's a speculative investment at this stage.
High risk, high reward.
Exactly.
And with that, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, one final thought for you all. So we talked about the potential of AI. We talked about the challenges of a young company. But beyond the stock price, what other metrics should we be looking at to really gauge Firefly's progress over the next year? That's something for you all to ponder. Thanks for listening.
Healthcare companies often move differently than the broader market. Shorting health companies specifically might not provide a sound hedge against overall market movements, since they tend to have their own dynamics and influences. So, using healthcare companies as a hedge might not yield as effective protection as expected. Shorting healthcare companies can be a risky endeavor. Here's why. 1. Regulatory environment. Healthcare companies often operate under stringent regulations with varying government policies. Regulatory changes can either boost or damage stock prices. If a new regulatory framework is favorable, it can significantly affect the share performance of these companies. 2. Market sentiment. Healthcare companies are often subject to unpredictable market sentiments and investor psychology. A rise in healthcare costs or a public health scare could lead to increased demand, which is favorable for these companies' stock prices. When the Fear and Greed Index indicates extreme fear, it suggests that there's widespread pessimism and anxiety in the financial markets. This could be due to various factors like economic downturns, geopolitical tensions, or unexpected events that have caused investors to become increasingly cautious. During periods of extreme fear, market participants may withdraw their investments, leading to decreased market liquidity and potentially causing asset prices to fall significantly. If you enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, follow for more updates, and don't forget to sign up for the exclusive bonuses down below.
Listen up, traders, it's your lucky day. Quick gains insights is here to stay. Subscribe now, come join the fray. Financial wisdom will light your way. Join Quick Gains Insights today. Like this video, pave the way. Sign up in the description, no, without delay. 4,000 free insights today. Like this video, pave the way. Sign up in the description without delay. 4,000 free, let's slay.